Ask Earl Anything. This is my 1-year anniversary edition of Ask Earl Anything. And as you know, I'm actually doing 2 in almost a weekend. The first one went out Thursday night, and this one's going out Sunday morning on February 10th. And last year on February 10th, I put out my first Ask Earl Anything. And it was just kind of I had a couple questions from a couple guys that were watching some of my videos, and I just thought, let's just do a question show, and I'll just answer some questions in my Drum Talk format. Drum Talk's the name of the show that I use for like equipment videos and reviews and things like that. There's a lot of Drum Talk monikers out here on YouTube. There's at least 2 or 3 that do different types of interviews with drummers and other types of things with the moniker Drum Talk. So I'm not. It's a tight space, and I'm not the biggest of the bunch. So anyhow, my Drum Talk videos still go out as Drum Talk, but it's usually about equipment and things like that. But 1 year ago, I started this question show, and in the Drum Talk, I said, Ask Earl Anything. And it was just kind of a starting point. And since then, it took off. For a while there, it was weekly. And actually, after a year, this is my number 48th episode. Possibly 49th, but I think it's 48th if I look at everything. I have it marked down as 48th, okay? So, I have a few questions from the other show, one question I missed, and a couple other things I want to go over today, because it's a special show. I want to do some shout-outs, possibly, to people in the community that make this show fun and have been around from the beginning. Because that's really what my whole channel's about. It's about the community. And I am always so inspired when I get new drummers coming onto the channel and finding me through one of those old Drum Talk videos. The funny thing is my Drum Talk videos are the ones where people find me the most. I said this in a couple Ask Earl Anythings a few episodes back, but I have a couple videos I did before I had any number of subscribers that have some high thousands of hits that get thrown in the YouTube rotation because of all the other videos I make, So it's just been kind of an interesting thing. But Ask Earl is kind of a popular show. I get usually a lot of guys watching in the first couple days. And anyhow, let's start. This is a new friend. His name Drum Bragg. I forgot his first name, but I've been on his site. It's up there. I think it's Tim Bragg for some reason. But if it's not Tim Drum Bragg, you can write it back in the comments. I know you got that wrong. I do get things wrong occasionally. He said, great stuff, really nice drumming. Was this a drumless version, or did you manage to get it right on top of the original? I'm presuming the former. Now, I think this was a question on one of my videos. I think it was on the After the Love Has Gone video, Earth, Wind, and Fire. And that particular video was taken from YouTube. There's a couple great YouTubers out there. Jones in something or other, and then Free Drumless Tracks that are out there. If you put drumless tracks in, you'll start finding a lot of, I guess it's, what do they call it? It's that game, Rock Band. I think it's the Rock Band game. And basically, he takes Rock Band and does a video, turns it into an MP4 or I think it's an MP4 with the audio, and puts it on without drums. So it's Rock Band without drums, so you can play the drum track on it. And there's a whole bunch of them out there. And I don't think I got it from that guy. I think there was a guy that was doing some Earth, Wind, and Fire stuff that had After the Love Has Gone. But that's where I get a lot of tracks. But I also get a lot of tracks from books that I have acquired over the years. And just to show you a couple of these things, my daughters, you know the interesting story about this? Here's the interesting story. The interesting story is, when I was in my transition in 2017, I had a few drumless tracks. I had a book called Gordon Godwin's Big Fat Big Band. Now, I haven't had the nerve to put one of these up there yet. I'm getting closer to trying one, but I bought this because I was big band charts, and I thought, well, I'm going to work on my big band reading. This stuff is some tough stuff here, okay? If you're not a really good reader, this is some tough stuff, but it's challenging and fun. It's very extremely musical, and it's a great big band to play along with. Haven't done one of these yet. The first time I put one of these up is going to be a big mark for me. But my daughter, Bethany, she bought me for Father's Day an old Music Minus One book called Drum Star. And Drum Star was this album I had as a kid where you had on one side of the groove was all play along with drumless, and the other side had the actual drummer playing it so you could hear how they played it, and then you had a chart for it. Well, she got me that, and it just some really old jazz, 60s, 70s jazz rock kind of tunes, and I started doing some of those, and then I started buying my own, and I went kind of crazy, and I bought three other ones that I had. So the next one I bought was Wipeout, which was this was Jim Chapin's band, an all-star band. He had Clark Terry, the trumpet player, who I've met from Jersey City State College back in the day. There were some great players on this. And this is where I got Satin Doll that I just released yesterday, or today, I guess it is. Today's Saturday. Tomorrow will be yesterday. This came out of the Wipeout tracks. So I bought this first because I had this as a kid too. I had it as a record. And I started playing these. And then I had this one, Northern Lights. Northern Lights was another Music Minus One with a big band drummer on it. And I started doing some of these, but I bought this one next, Take One. And Take One was actually Music Minus One record. I didn't have this record. I had the Northern Lights. But this is the New Jersey City State University Big Band, or the Jersey City State College Big Band, like it was in the time, from 1976. Matter of fact, one of my drum instructors, a guy named Richie DeRosa, wrote one of the charts in here. It's called She Cries. I did a cover of She Cries. The funny thing was, he was the drummer in the jazz ensemble, but he didn't play on the album. This other drummer that did all these Music Minus One records was the drummer. And I'm trying to find what his name was again, Tom Collier. Really interesting thing, Tom Collier. But some really great charts on here. I've done almost all of these. I've done almost all of the Wipeouts and almost all of the Northern Lights. Then Christmas of 2017, my daughter Sandra bought me Duke Ellington, or maybe this was Bethany. Now the Duke Ellington book is a big band play-along book, but you're playing on top of a band. So the Duke Ellington ones, you're playing on top of a band, so there's another drummer there you got to bury. So all my Duke Ellington stuff, I'm burying the other drummer. And that takes a little bit of skill. As some of you guys who do drum covers know, when you're playing on top of the drummer, you've got to play it exact. And jazz is not an exact thing, especially when you're looking at drum charts and you're trying to make the figures, you're not really thinking about what the other drummer played. So that was some challenges in recording some of these, but I had a lot of fun with this last year. I played almost all, I think I played the whole book on this one. And then there was another book my daughter bought me, which was the Brubeck book. And the Brubeck book right here, this has got drumless. And they actually have it set up so you can get it for drums or bass or piano. So it's a rhythm section book. And you have all the actual charts for everybody, not just the drum charts. So I have you could actually take a piano player and a bass player and all sit here on the book and play it. And you can play Robin's Nest or Invitation, which are some of the standards that they were playing. Take Five was not in this, but a lot of great Brubeck tunes that he wrote were in this book. And I played a lot of these. I think I played this whole book last year. A lot of fun with that. And then another book is another Swing Favorites. This is just like the Ellington book. I just started working out of this. It's got In the Mood. That cover's coming someday. Again, you've got to be on top of another drummer. And then I found this whole series called Sitting In With the Big Band. And there's a volume 1 and a volume 2. And I did most of volume 1 and I'm starting volume 2. So there's a lot of drum tracks, drumless tracks here. This is where I get a lot of my jazz stuff from. But the rock stuff, there are a couple rock books like this one, the Hal Leonard play-along books, but these don't have the words on it. So they get the original track, but you don't have the words. They show you the words on the chart, which is kind of annoying to me. They have a version of Uptown Funk without the words, but there's a better version of Uptown Funk out there on YouTube land, Drumless Track Land. So if you want drumless tracks, there's bunches on YouTube. I'll also tell you that if you subscribe to Spotify, Peter Erskine's got a whole bunch of drumless tracks on Spotify. It's kind of you just look up Peter Erskine and you'll find this whole collection of drumless standard tunes that he put out there. I've never done any of his stuff either yet. But there's a lot of places to get music, okay? And there's some really good stuff. There's also a funk book, which I've played a few of them, like Sissy Strut, and a wordless version of Shining Star by Earth, Wind & Fire, and a wordless version of Superstition. And I just did Superstition on the little kit this month, and I found one online, of course, on YouTube, that had Stevie Wonder singing, which is a lot more fun to play with him singing than singing it. But the groove of that tune is you can just have a blast on that tune. So anyhow, that's where I get a lot of my tracks. I just want everybody to know and kind of think about buying some of these books, especially if you want to get into some of the more, the tougher songs, I'll call it. Okay, my next question is from Zach Drums, and Zach says, since you were talking about your mic setup, this was on Thursday's video, maybe you could go into how you mix everything for the next episode, and how much reverb and compression you use. I'm trying to figure out how to set up an E-kit to do multi-channel. Right now, everything comes out of one, and I mix it all together. Am I on the right track, but is there room for improvement? And then he said, I liked your NAMM analysis. Did you see any E-kits? And if so, what did you like? I'll talk about the E-kits first, okay? There were some E-kit stuff out there, electronic drum stuff at NAMM this year. Elisa's put out the strike pad just before NAMM, and there's a bunch of reviews on it. The strike pad is the direct competitor, the newest competitor to the SPD-SX, the Roland SPD-SX sample pad. The strike pad is that version of it. They got 32 gigabytes of space on it, and it looks really cool. And you can do looping. The only thing you can't do on SPD-SX is do looping, as far as you can program from your pads a loop. That's what I mean. You can do looping. You can put loops in the SPD-SX, but you can't do the programming of it. So and plus this Elisa's has got so many different samples in it. So you can just imagine you could build a drum groove, and then loop it. Like it's kind of like a drum machine built in. It looked kind of cool. Also, you can set up tempos and run the show from there, and you can run all your loops from there and all the tracks from there, just like the SPD-SX. And there's so much you can do with it, and it's exhausting. And unless you're in a situation where you need to do it, you're probably not going to get it. I don't use my SPD-SX as much as I should. It's a cool tool to have. That was one cool thing. Pearl came out with some E-drum stuff, so you might want to look up Pearl electronic drums. I think there was some E-drum coverage on that too at the show. Also, there's a lot more E-drum companies that are doing drum shells construction. I think Pearl's one of them. Roland, of course, has theirs, and there's ATV, I think. But I'm not an E-drummer, Zach, you know that. So, truthfully, you want E-drums, you look at guys like Mike Luke. Which brings me to the next part of your question, which is how you mix songs and compression and reverb and EQ. Truthfully, if you're doing electronic drums, the best way to do it is to do it MIDI, is to have a DAW, digital audio workstation, like Logic. And then you'd bring in something like Steven Slate drums or Drumagog or Battery, or the one that Mike Luke uses, which I don't remember what it's called. I don't have it, by the way. Actually, in Logic, there's a great drummer program in Logic, and there's a drum machine in Logic, and there's a lot of drum samples in Logic, so you can actually trigger MIDI with pads, Logic, and get the sounds out of that. But basically, the best way to mix your electronic kit is to mix it MIDI, record it MIDI track. So basically, if I had an electronic kit, I would record, and I had a DAW, I would record the audio to have the audio. So pick my setup for the audio, and then I'd have a MIDI cable so I can run MIDI tracks and change the sounds later if I wanted to, or trigger those sounds if I had my latency low enough. The thing about computer recording is you've got to keep the samples rates at such a low, not the sample rate, because I'm not talking about 44.1 or 48K, I'm talking about the buffer, the sample buffer, I guess. You know, you've got to keep it really low because MIDI has a latency problem too if you have your buffer set too high in your DAW. So you got to be careful with that aspect of it if you want to trigger. Whenever I record piano and we're using piano samples out of Logic, I bring my session down to like 32 on the buffer or 64, the highest. If I get like 128, where I usually record drums at like 128, I think that's samples per second, but don't quote me on that one. But if I have it higher than 128, then I have latency issues with the track, and I end up being ahead or behind. Because I'm not listening to it ahead or behind, but the way it's getting into the audio workstation is ahead and behind, so it messes with your timing a little bit. So that's the big thing, is learning a digital audio workstation. And if you've got an E-kit, trigger MIDI and go in that way. And then you can mess with things too if you needed to. As far as compression and reverb, on my mixes, I always have reverb. That kind of gives the sense of the room and being in the mix a little bit. It kind of spreads the drums out in the mix against usually the sterile YouTube track or one of these MP4 tracks or MP3 tracks from one of these CDs that I've got. I use compression and I use EQ. I also have a mix bus that's got a certain level of fatness to it. Some of my secret plugins are the Ampeg I think it's ATR 102, which is their tape emulation plugin. I use that on my mix bus all the time. I have a mix limiter and a bus compressor, precision limiter I use on everything, and the Oxford, I think it's called the Oxford. It's not exciter. It's not the limiter. There's a name for it. This Oxford plugin I use that I can actually push the track out by just kind of like messing with two little knobs, and it just finds the spot and it sounds good. All of my drums tracks on my regular kit are each drum I've got a mic on. This kit I've only got 4 mics on. I talked about that the last video. But even when I'm doing a 4 mic scenario, I've got a little bit of compression on the overhead, little compression on the snare drum and the kick. Usually I have gating on my toms when I'm using the other kit, the walnut kit. I have gates to gate out the rest of the sound, so you're getting a clean snare and kick sound without the toms bleeding the snare and kick sound into the microphones. Overheads picks up everything. A lot of times I'll EQ on my overheads, I'll EQ out to about, somewhere between 100 and 200 hertz, and I'll take out the bottom, which is taking out most of the kick drum out of the overhead, so you're getting toms and snare still, and the cymbals, especially when I do it this way. But for me to do an in-depth, I did do an in-depth how I mix video a year ago, and I didn't do it the way most guys do it. I did it with the camera on my screen and me playing with the mixer and hearing the mix in the camera mic. Probably not the best way to do it. There's better ways to do that. One of these days I'm going to figure out how to use UBS or one of these other programs that can basically screen capture stuff, and then I'll try to do one of those Mike Luke type videos, because Mike Luke does a really great job of showing the audio and his mixing ideas and what he does and all that stuff. But until I do that, yes, I use reverb, yes, I use compression, and if you live closer, Zach, you can come over to my house and show you some things. Everybody knows I'm up for that. That's one of my things. So, thanks for asking. Now comes to the big question. This is the question I missed last time. Michael Perry asked me a question. And he asked me a question. I was hoping you would talk about drum shells and mention it this week. Well, I am going to get it in this week, Michael. And I told you I would get to your question. And your question specifically was about wood drum shells and what different woods do to the tones of the drums. Okay? So let's look at a couple things, all right? First off, maple drums. Gretsch drums have been considered maple drums forever, but the Gretsch Jasper shell is a maple gumwood shell, okay? They've got maple on the outside and the inside, but they've got this gumwood in the middle. And that's the mystery of the Gretsch shell. 6 plies, and they've got those plies of gumwood in the middle, okay? Now, most companies make a straight maple shell. 6 plies of maple, 7 plies of maple, 8 plies of maple. That's kind of the common shell that most companies put out. Most drum shells are ply, but there are differences. There are shells that are stave and that are solid 1-ply shell drums. Those are different. I'll come back to them in a little bit. But maple usually has a warm sound, a focus sound, a warm sound. Okay? It's a preferred sound for most drum kits is maple. Maple's the most common drum kit sound. Back in the 80s, Yamaha introduced a sound that was kind of new at that point. There was only a couple companies making them. It was birch drums. And the recording custom drums were the first birch drums, all birch drums. That and the Tama Superstar drums were all birch. Birch have like a high frequency boost and a great mid-range, while it has a good low-end punch. So there's it has, boost. It says this: if you seek the boost of high frequencies, then birch is a good choice. The mid-range is slightly reduced while maintaining a good low-end punch. So there's like a mid-range cut, but there's some high frequencies and there's that fat punch of a low-end punch in birch. And birch toms sound amazing, and that's why the Yamaha Recording Customs became one of the most popular drum kits in the 80s and 90s for recording studios. Tons of recording studios bought recording custom drums. So those birch shells were cool, and they really are a great sound. But everybody was still, the funny thing was a lot of those Yamaha endorsers at the time, like Vinny, okay, or the Pearl endorsers like Jeff Porcaro, they were still playing Gretsch drums in the studio, so everybody was still trying to make maple drums like Gretsch, trying to find that secret formula, all right? Now, one of my favorite shell constructions is mahogany, and I talk about this a lot. I had a Club Date kit, a Ludwig Club Date kit, Blue Sparkle, 1964, which was mahogany, poplar mahogany with maple re-rings. And those drums are so fat and so warm. Mahogany is a warm sound. Punchy, warm, low-end thud, that Ludwig sound of the 60s. The Ringo drums, okay? By 1968, Ludwig went to a maple, popular maple. So a 3-ply shell with maple re-rings, and that was the bottom sound. The bottom sound was maple, popular maple, okay? Both are really cool. So that poplar shell is just, this poplar wood in the shell makes those drums have a certain beautiful warmth to them. And of course the mahogany has a super fat, deep tone to them, which I just love. So I'm a big fan of mahogany, all right? Now today, there are so many woods out there, it's hard to keep track. That's why I'm looking at my little chart here. Walnut, I have a walnut snare drum, a 1-ply walnut. Now, the difference between plies and 1-ply is that 1-ply is a steam bent shell. And steam bent shells are companies like Noble and Cooley, Slingerland Radio King, okay, and a lot of boutique custom drum companies make a 1-ply shell. 1-ply shell is taking one solid piece of wood, I don't know, about 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch, I guess, somewhere in that range. And they basically steam bend it round 14-inch, then they put reinforcing rings on it. And they're very focused and they're beautiful drums. And my walnut kind of meets the description they put here. If you want an equal amount of high, mid, and low tones, go with walnut. Walnut gives you tones that are substantial yet warm. It's a beautiful drum. I really love the drum. And it's very unique. It's 7x14, and it's got a certain kind of warm sound to it. Now there's other drums out there. There's beech, there's oak, there's cherry, there's babinga, and then there's these combinations of shells. Babinga walnut, babinga maple. I mean, Tama's got a whole bunch of babinga shells, and it seems like you can find so many different shells today. So many different woods. The most popular is maple. I will tell you, if you can find a set of birch recording custom drums, buy them. They are awesome, especially the old ones from the 80s. And if you can find a set of Ludwig mahoganies, actually any mahogany drum you can find today is probably going to sound good. That's why I talk a lot about the Catalina Club drums, the Gretsch Catalina Clubs. Those are a mahogany shell. And they are fat and warm. Not the prettiest drums usually, but they are fat and warm, nice sounding drums, and cheap, actually. Mahogany was something Pearl used to use in the 70s too. They used to make a lot of mahogany drums. So mahogany is a great sounding wood. Now a couple other shell materials. One is fiberglass. Fiberglass are punchy. My concert toms are fiberglass. They're punchy. And they're punchy in a different way than the Vistalites, which are plastic, plexiglass. Vistalites are abrasively harsh, in most cases. You've got to find the right head combo for Vistalites to make them sound warmer for me. But they've got a lot of punch and presence because they're plastic. Fiberglass has got a little bit less of that harshness to it, but they've got a really nice punchy tone to them, okay? And of course, then you get into your metals, your brass, steel. Brass is one of the most popular snare drum materials for metal snare drums. Steel snare drums, you find a lot of low-end drum company make steel drums. Copper and bronze. Bronze is a mixture of copper and brass that makes bronze. And probably the most popular is the aluminum drum, which is the Superphonic or the acrylite, Ludwig acrylite. Which brings me to my next question. So I'm going to roll Michael Perry's question into the last question I have, which is from Kurt Johnson. He said, "Hey Earl, can you talk about the mystique of aluminum snare drums and your thoughts on the WFL III drums?" Well, I think he tied the Ludwig mystique of the Superphonic into the new WFL drums, which is made by Bill Ludwig III, who reinvented the Ludwig Drum Company. Let's talk about aluminum drum shells. I'll come back and get WFL, the last bit of the Ask Earl Anything. The most popular aluminum shell snare drum is by far the Ludwig Superphonic. In a 6.5 by 14, the LM402 or the LM400, okay, you are talking about two of the classic snare drums. I've had a whole bunch of the 5 by 14 drums. I even had a super sensitive, which is the same shell as the Superphonic, just a different snare mechanism. I had two of those too in my lifetime. Really nice sounding aluminum drums. But I will tell you the best aluminum snare drums I've ever played are the cast aluminum snare drums. And I own one. This is my DMR 6.5 by 14 cast aluminum snare drum. Now cast, it's basically a 3 mil thick shell with a 5 mil reinforcing ring, and it's built into the casting. The reason I'm saying this is because this shell is the same shell that DW uses for their cast aluminum drums and that Gretsch uses for their cast aluminum drums. It's made in the same factory. And the guy who made DMR custom drums went to that factory and he was talking to the people in Taiwan where they make these cast aluminum shells, and they said, oh yeah, those are the Gretsch ones and those are the DW ones. And then he sold him this shell. This is the shell he took back from Taiwan in his suitcase. And the reason why this drum is black and not an aluminum, brushed aluminum look like it had on it when I first saw it is because he put it in his suitcase and he scratched a little part of the shell. And he was so bummed about it. I wasn't bummed about it. I was kind of like, no, I want the brushed look. He was so bummed about it, Dan Rotelli, DMR Custom Drums, who basically said, let's try to powder coat it. So I chose the powder coating for this drum, and it's a matte black finish, which you can't get fingerprints on, which was a great choice, by the way, because they have a black finish that if you touch it, you just see the fingerprints everywhere. You never see them. And I don't know. This just turned it into an awesome drum. But see the brushed aluminum look of the tension castings? Okay, that was the look of the whole drum at one point, which is what the Gretsch looks like too when you see their cast aluminum drums. And I had a Dunnett R2 throw on it, which was a Dunnett, because Dunnett only made these for their drums. He got one of these for me, which was amazing with the little rounded side. This is the R2. This is like after the R1, which is the original. I have two of the R1s. And Dan named this drum the Hammer, and I think he made 5 of these drums over his time. And this one's called the Hammer, and it was my signature snare drum, quote unquote. I just find cast aluminum snare drums to sound amazing. This drum is just... It's aluminum. It sounds like I mean, this is why I don't have a Ludwig Superphonic, to be honest. Because this, and you put this against the Ludwig Superphonic, and there's just something a little sweeter, and I have done that. And I just rather have this drum than have a LM402. Now, the LM402 is a classic. You know, if you can get a bottom, that bottom sound, that's the bottom sound. But I will tell you that if you look at today's Gretsch players, a lot of today's Gretsch players are playing the cast aluminum snare drum because it has that sound. That's the sound they're going for. So aluminum has a special place. Now, the other aluminum drum that has a special place is the acrylite. And the acrylite is the non-chrome version of the Superphonic shell, that Ludalloy shell, which is aluminum. Again, beautiful sounding drum and a couple dollars cheaper. And I think acrylites sound awesome. I had one of those once too. I just didn't know what I had when I had it. It was considered a cheap student drum. So I won't tell you what I did to that, but stupid. A lot of stupid stuff I did when I was younger. That was one of them. But I think Ludwig drums are the classic aluminum sound. But I think if you go for the new aluminum sound, it's the cast aluminum. Gretsch has got one, DW's got one. DMR doesn't make drums anymore, as far as I know. But also Noble Cooley's got one. The classic alloy, the Noble Cooley Alloy Classic is aluminum. So those are beautiful drums too, if you're looking for that sound. Now, WFL III. I have looked at the WFL III drums online. I've watched some reviews of them. I mean, they look like boutique snare drums to me. He's making a nice boutique line of snare drums, but he can't touch the classic Ludwig snare drums. Ludwig doesn't make the greatest wooden snare drums. They don't make bad wooden snare drums. I mean, some of their old mahogany snare drums are great. If you find an old 50s mahogany snare drum, one of those old school snare drums, those are some beautiful snare drums. But Ludwig's known for their metal snare drums. Black Beauties, Superphonics, okay? I mean, that's what they're known for. So when you look at their metal snare drums, that's what Ludwig's known for. And WFL III, Bill Ludwig III, couldn't bring that over to his world. He may be even making a few metals, but he can't make them like those drums. Now, everybody under the sun copies them. I mean, Yamaha's got a copy of a Superphonic, acrylite actually right now. They've got an aluminum drum that looks like an acrylite in their recording custom line. Pearl has been trying to make a Black Beauty forever in different types. Everybody seems to make some kind of an aluminum drum at some point in their... Slingerland had an old aluminum drum to try to compete against Ludwig's, but nobody competed against Ludwig's, Superphonic. So, I think Bill Ludwig III is a nice guy. He's got some boutique wooden snare drums. If he's got some solid shells, you could check him out. But truthfully, if I was going to buy a boutique custom snare drum today, the ones that I would buy just by name alone, if I found a deal on one, any Noble Cooley. Noble Cooley makes great drums. I have one of those. Dunnett, Ron Dunnett makes great drums. And I would say Craviotto, if you can find some of the old Craviottos that Johnny Craviotto built. If you get the ones that are signed Johnny Craviotto inside them, I would go for those. I'm not saying the new ones aren't that, but they're a lot of money for maybe being that, you know what I mean? The other boutique drum companies that I really like is Joyful Noise Drums. They make some great metal shell snare drums. That's another company for metal shells. Brass especially. Those are some really excellent drums, actually, Joyful Noise. Joyful Noise is on the top of my list. Those are probably my top four. Craviotto, real Craviotto, Dunnett, any of the Dunnett. The titanium drums are really beautiful. Noble Cooley, solid shell drums. Noble Cooley makes just as good a solid shell drum, I think, as Craviotto. They were making them around the same time they came out. Okay, Noble Cooley kept its name. And Joyful Noise. I love those 4 companies. Those are some great drums. And maybe one day I'll get a Joyful Noise. You know, I haven't been drum crazy since about 2010 or 11. I stopped my craziness with snare drums. My friend Dan kind of cured me. I bought one of the walnut drum, and then he gave me this drum for doing some drum lessons for him. And having 2 signature drums was kind of like, that was my high point. And I got my 5x14 Noble Cooley. But I'm starting to hanker wanting another drum. I think I'd like to get my hands on a chrome over brass Ludwig 6.5x14 or a Black Beauty 6.5x14. Just to have one, to say I have that black size Black Beauty. I have one Black Beauty 5x14. And of course, if I can get a Joyful Noise in that same size as a brass, I would love that. Because I've looked at the Joyful Noise in like Fork's Drum Closet. Beautiful drums. Excellent drums. So those are the boutique companies I would go to. Those 4 companies I just mentioned to you. There might even be another one I can't think of right now. But anyhow, that's it for Ask Earl Anything. The anniversary, the 1-year anniversary show. I hope you have questions. You send questions. I'll be doing another show soon. I love your questions. I said I wanted to throw some shout outs. Let me think about it. First out, I want to shout out to my 1,600 subscribers. When I started this show a year ago, I think I had about 400 subs. And that's where I started. I started in the 400 to 500 range. And I've grown over 1,000 subscribers in a year. And probably a lot of it has to do with putting out a consistent show every week and people finding it. So I want to thank you all that watch the show on a regular basis, even if you just drop in for a few minutes. And then I want to thank the guys in the drum community, the ones that are always there. Brian Corey. Brian Corey's been one of my stalwart fans. He's been around a long time. You know, there's a whole bunch of new fans, people that come all the time that I see that always write on my channel. I got a lot of new friends, a lot of old friends. Michael Johnson's a good friend of mine. Jeff Holden, Beats by Jay, Drum Man 190, Drum Covers by Bill, Little Drummer Channel, Jeremy Little Drummer Channel. These are all people that make the community what it is, you know what I mean? And I want to thank them for their contributions to the community. Jeff Holden. And so many guys that write all the time, 2112 Drums, you know, Brian Corey, and then I've got new guys like Toasty, my friend Todd. There's just a lot. Mike Frisano, he's a good friend. I've made some really good friends through this show. Mike Frisano was one of my early fans. He used to write me like every show, and he'd like pick my little ticks, like when I was doing things like this on my show. He would basically call me out on it. But we struck up a friendship through that, you know, through texting and then eventually phone calls and FaceTime. And Mike Frisano's a great player. He's a great player, and he's a knowledgeable guy, and he knows drums like you can't believe. And one of these days I'm going to do an interview with him. I keep saying that. That's my plan. So I've got some really great friends that I've made over this last year, and I want to thank you all for watching Ask Earl Anything. Your questions make the show. Oh, I also want to thank Mrs. Hammer, my wife, for putting up with my crazy YouTube habit of making videos and drum covers and allowing me to have my hang in my cave, my studio. Okay? You will see a lot more of this, hopefully, and hopefully you'll see a lot less of me soon, but I'm working on that too. Anyhow, thank you for watching Ask Earl Anything. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.